Hi there, I am Scott Telek, author of the Swithen, the award-winning series of Arthurian novels that remains completely faithful to the actual medieval legend of King Arthur across 25 novels, with 7 of those books out right now, and I'm at work on number 8. Alrighty, so in this video we're going to talk about the 2017 film King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, directed by Guy Ritchie. And as with the other of my movie versus legend videos, we're not talking so much about whether it's a good movie, we're focusing on how much or little it relates to the actual Arthurian legend. In this case, there's one short answer. It doesn't. Alright, maybe like 3%. This movie's trying hard not to be like all that boring old King Arthur stuff you've seen and are tired of. It's not your father's King Arthur. And it's not anyone's King Arthur because it's not King Arthur. But there are a few things to say about it in relation to the medieval Arthurian legend, so let's dive into those. So somewhere along the line, King Arthur's stories began to be considered old and tired, like, oh, we all know the story, even though in reality, most of us don't know the actual legend at all. The other thing is, the real King Arthur story doesn't have a lot of tales with clear-cut endings or defined goals such as would fit our modern movie storytelling conventions. So that's another reason it doesn't actually make a great candidate for a modern blockbuster. I have a separate video called, Why Are There No Good King Arthur Movies? And the short answer is, it's just too long and too weird to make for a decent movie or even a TV show, which is why, much as we all think we know the King Arthur story inside and out, most of us don't really know what's in the actual legend. Still, fantasy movies are huge, what with Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, and King Arthur's one of the most recognizable IPs out there. Therefore, movies must be made whether they work or not. And one method of doing that is just to create a generic action fantasy movie and throw on a bunch of Arthurian names people might recognize, and that's what we have here. Another thing to know up front that helps to explain why we ended up with the movie we did is that this was supposed to be the first of a 6-film series that would create a King Arthur cinematic universe. So each film would focus on a different character, like King Arthur here, and then Merlin, and Gawain, and Lancelot, and in the end they would all come together just like the Avengers. And the very idea of that kind of shows you up front that there's not a great deal of respect for the actual Arthurian legend going on here, because they're throwing out almost everything about the original story and treating it like it's just generic epic fantasy X. And 2, that already does happen organically in the Arthurian legend, where we have a bunch of characters who do have their own adventures and then team up and go on adventures together, only not in a neat and tidy sequential order. In fact, when I saw Avengers Infinity War, I was like, yeah, my book series is going to work out for that very reason. That we have this multitude of interesting characters, stories, all interconnect and affect each other in fascinating ways. Okay, so let's get started in the actual movie. So in this movie, Mordred is a warlock, and Uther and Vortigern are brothers, with Uther being Arthur's father. Only one of these things is accurate to the legend, which is that Arthur is Uther's son. In the legend, Mordred is Arthur's son, so Mordred is never alive at the same time as Uther. Also, Vortigern was king 2 kings prior to Arthur, so in the legend, Vortigern and Arthur are never alive at the same time. So in the movie, Uther has the sword Excalibur, which is a magical sword forged for him by Merlin. We'll get into the sword later, but in the legend, Merlin has nothing at all to do with the creation of Excalibur, which is given to Arthur by the Lady of the Lake in one of the most famous images of the Arthurian legend, where it's held above the surface of the water for Arthur to take up. Okay, so in the movie, Vortigern is jealous of Uther's power and sacrifices his own wife to become a demon knight, which then allows him to kill Uther and Uther's wife, but not before the infant Arthur floats away on the river, Moses style. So the character of Igraine is Uther's wife for a while in the legend, but that's after he steals her from her previous husband and impregnates her through deception, so it's not like she's just his beloved wife. Igraine is also the mother of Morgan Le Fay, by the way. And in the legend, there are no giant elephants or sea witches, as you see here. In the movie, Arthur is taken in by a group of prostitutes and grows up to be a tough and canny, low-level gangster of the streets who's not afraid to settle matters with his fists, in the manner of heroes of numerous Guy Ritchie films. In the legend, there's a whole story in which Merlin promises that Uther give him the child conceived as payment for Uther's one night with the grain, and Merlin takes the baby away as soon as he's born. He places the baby Arthur in the care of the Ectors, a humble knight who raises Arthur away from money and the comforts of royalty so he can learn to have a solid set of values. Arthur also grows up alongside his foster brother, Kay, who is at his side until the very end of the saga. Kay does not appear at all in this film. So in the movie, Vortigern is a tyrant and is trying to build a tower. This is actually true to the legend, or at least refers to it, because in the legend, Vortigern is trying to build a tower to protect himself against Uther and his older brother Pendragon, sometimes called Aurelius, because Vortigern killed their older brother in order to become king, and he's afraid of them coming back to overthrow him and claim their birthright. Vortigern's tower keeps falling because there are two dragons underneath it, a red one and a white one, and they have to dig the dragons up and let them fight before the tower can be built. The red dragon of this legend is actually the one you still see on the flag of Wales today. Meanwhile, in this movie, the Sword in the Stone is underwater. Maybe just don't ask about that. All the water drains away suddenly, and Vortigern has all the men in the city brought in to try to pull the sword. Arthur's among those people, and there's a significant moment because there's a bunch of people waiting to pull the sword, but Arthur decides that he shouldn't have to wait his turn. All those people can wait, but not him, and so he just shoves his way ahead of everyone and bullies his way to the front of the line. This movie dares us to ask the question, what if King Arthur was a total knob? He's soon making all sorts of snotty comments to the people who are trying to help him. And later in the film, he makes a bunch of ambassadors from another kingdom kneel to him as he bullies them and reneges on an agreement they had with the previous king. Sure, the previous king was Vortigern, but you know, a deal's a deal. So this movie's idea of a cool, admirable guy that would be a good king is a bully who lords his strength and power over others. By contrast, the King Arthur of legend is very much not a knob and certainly not a bully. King Arthur rules with chivalry, which is a code of conduct that prizes honor above everything. And a big part of chivalry is courtesy toward others. Arthur comes to power in a very uncivilized time, and overarching all of the stories is that he brings civilization and civility to this uncouth world, mostly through the honorable deeds of the Knights of the Round Table. They're sworn to protect women, the poor, the church, and the elderly, and they abide by rules like that a knight must keep his promises, must defend women when they've been wronged, must never attack an unarmed opponent, and must get off their horse if their opponent's on foot. They talk a lot about honor and being a worthy person, and being honorable really is the most important thing to Arthur and his knights. This is not a hidden subtext. This is a main topic that they discuss at length. One of the things that, as an author, really helped me get into the character of who Arthur is, because often in the old stories he can just be kind of a blank heroic archetype, is that when someone comes into the court and says, "King Arthur, you are the worst, most shameful king that ever lived," Arthur doesn't respond with, "Yeah, well, piss off, dickwad. Get over here and I'll open a can of ass whooping." The Arthur of the legend asks, "Why do you say that?" He tries to understand the criticism laid against him. His courtesy and honor is his key feature, and thus he is not a knob or a bully as this movie portrays him. So let's move on to the sword, which, as I'm sure you know, is called Excalibur. Since this movie is called Legend of the sword is a huge deal. In this movie, when Arthur grabs it with both hands, not just one for some reason, it causes him to have visions of his father and mother and this demon knight who killed his father, who we soon find out is Vortigern. He has to confront his past and realize that the sword is his birthright. We also eventually find out that the stone the sword is in is the actual body of his father, which has been turned to stone. Arthur has to go through a sort of ritual to be up to the power of the sword, but once he is, Excalibur becomes kind of a super weapon where one stroke causes an explosion that sends like 10 knights flying across the room. So Arthur is able to plow through armies of knights just with the power of this sword, which also causes his eyes to glow and him to be all infused with like power. So a common theme in Arthurian adaptations is for Excalibur to be a magic sword or to be the sword of power or whatever. In the actual legend, Excalibur is not a magic sword. Well, it is a magic sword in that it's made by the fairies and given to him by the Lady of the Lake, but never really does possess magic. All we know is that the Lady of the Lake says the name Excalibur means cut steel, but we never actually find out whether it does cut steel or not. It kind of is just a sword. So it's definitely not a super weapon, and it does not allow Arthur to have fantastical powers. What is special and magical, although you never see it in any adaptation, is the scabbard that Excalibur goes into, because as long as Arthur wears it, he will not bleed from any of his wounds. So boring as it may seem, Excalibur is pretty much just a sword. A super cool sword, but just a sword. The other thing is that the Arthur of legend is really just a man. Just a plain old human being, and that's what makes him awesome. He's of royal birth, which at the time was believed to make people inherently better, but he was raised among humble people, so he's grounded in his values. He fights alongside his men, which earns their respect because he puts himself in danger with them. He's not sending them into war while he's off safe in some pavilion. He's also very imperfect. He makes bad mistakes and really ends up paying for them. One mistake he makes very early in his reign is what ends up haunting him through his whole life and ultimately costing him his kingdom. So even though the legend has a lot of magic, the Arthurian story really is just about human beings and the problems and glories of their lives. So we get to the end of the movie, and just to mention, in the medieval legend of King Arthur, there are no giant snakes. In the movie, after things have been resolved, Arthur's working on making the round table. In the actual legend, Merlin makes the round table for Uther, Arthur's father. The round table itself actually is magic, and it draws the people who sit at it into allegiance and connection with each other. There is one seat at the round table that no one's ever allowed to sit at because it will eventually be filled by Galahad, who's the knight that will achieve the Holy Grail. When Uther defies Merlin's warning and lets a man sit in that seat, that man turns to lead and melts. Once Uther dies, the round table goes to King Leodegrance, who happens to be the father of Guinevere. So when Arthur and Guinevere get married, he receives the round table as part of her dowry. We often hear that the whole deal with the round table is that no one's at the head of it, so it's inherently democratic. And I think they say that here in the movie too, but honestly I've never seen that idea expressed in the actual Arthurian legend. Alrighty, I hope that gives you a better understanding of this movie and how it matches the Arthurian legend. Check out some of my other videos, like the ones where I go through the movie Excalibur or Monty Python and the Holy Grail, if you want to find out how closely they match the actual Arthurian legend. And if you want to get into a fun, readable book series that stays completely faithful to the medieval legend of King Arthur, check out my series, The Swithen, where we're 7 novels into an epic 25-novel retelling of the classic saga that has endured for over 1,000 years. Alright, thank you. See you later.